Deep in the rugged mountains of Jalisco, a shadow moves where no law dares to tread. His name, El Mencho, whispered in fear and pursuit. As Mexico's most elusive drug lord, his empire grew in silence, his presence unseen, yet his power undeniable. This is the story of the man who became a ghost target. In the chaos of Mexico's drug war, one name began to echo through both the jungles and the corridors of power: Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known to the world as El Mencho. Born in 1966 in the rural town of Aguililla, Michoacán, he grew up amid poverty and the collapse of agricultural stability that left many young men searching for survival through illicit means. His early years were unremarkable, defined by hardship and labor in avocado fields, yet beneath the quiet surface lay a shrewdness that would later define one of the most powerful cartels in the world. As a teenager, Mencho followed a path many from his region took, northward, crossing into California during the booming years of the 1980s drug trade. In the United States, he lived in the shadows, working in construction and odd jobs before his life veered into crime. Arrested in the late 1980s for heroin trafficking, he served time in a U.S. prison, a period that hardened his resolve and deepened his understanding of the narco networks connecting Mexico and the American market. When deported back to Mexico, he returned not as a failed migrant, but as a man who had studied the mechanics of the drug empire firsthand. Back home, Mexico was in transition. The Guadalajara cartel had splintered following the fall of its leaders, and new factions were fighting for dominance. El Mencho aligned himself with the Milenio Cartel, a group originally tied to the powerful Valencia family, which controlled methamphetamine routes through Jalisco and Michoacán. Mencho's loyalty and calculated restraint earned him the trust of the Valencia brothers, particularly Armando Valencia Cornelio, known as El Maradona. For years, Mencho served as a low-profile lieutenant, managing shipments and security, watching the landscape shift as government crackdowns destabilized old alliances. In 2003, when El Maradona was captured, the Milenio cartel fractured. Out of the chaos, Mencho began carving his own structure. He saw opportunity not in open warfare but in control, territory, loyalty, and discipline. Alongside Eric Valencia, known as Il-85, he formed a new faction that would later evolve into the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. What began as a local network in Jalisco would soon rise into a multinational operation rivaling the Sinaloa cartel itself. By 2010, Mexico was engulfed in President Felipe Calderón's militarized war on drugs. Cartels were splintering under pressure, and violence was at its peak. El Mencho, almost unknown to the public at the time, moved strategically through the vacuum. While other groups fought visible wars, he built quietly, combining ruthless efficiency with the appearance of order. His cartel positioned itself as a defense force against rivals, especially the Zetas, who had earned a reputation for brutality. CJNG began to call itself Mata Zetas, Zeta killers, broadcasting videos of captured enemies, claiming to fight for the people of Jalisco. It was psychological warfare wrapped in propaganda, and it worked. Locals saw them as protectors, even as bodies piled up. In 2011, the CJNG made its presence undeniable. Dozens of corpses were discovered across Veracruz, accompanied by banners declaring war on their rivals. The message was clear: CJNG had arrived. But while other leaders flaunted their power, Mencho stayed invisible. There were few photos of him, no flamboyant displays, no public betrayals. He avoided phones, moved constantly, and relied on tight circles of loyalty reinforced through family and fear. His wife Rosalinda González Valencia came from the Valencia clan, binding two powerful networks together. His son, Ruben Oseguera González, known as El Menchito, was groomed as his second in command, managing logistics and finance until his arrest years later. Mencho's empire expanded rapidly across Mexico, using a combination of violence, bribery, and local infiltration. Jalisco became the stronghold, but soon CJNG banners appeared in Colima, Guanajuato, Michoacán, and Veracruz. They diversified from methamphetamine into fentanyl, cocaine, and synthetic opioids, establishing international pipelines stretching from Asia to the United States. Unlike older cartels that relied solely on intimidation, CJN built infrastructure. Hidden labs in mountain ranges, drone surveillance, encrypted communication systems, and even armored convoys. The turning point came in 2015 when the Mexican government launched Operation Jalisco, an offensive aimed at dismantling the CJNG and capturing El Mencho. What happened next stunned the country. On May 1, a military helicopter was shot down by cartel gunmen near Villa Purificación, killing 8 soldiers and a police officer. It was the first time in Mexico's history that a cartel had brought down a government aircraft with military-grade weapons. The message was unmistakable. CJNG had firepower on par with the state. The operation failed, and El Mencho vanished deeper into the Sierra de Jalisco. After that day, he became the embodiment of the untouchable. Despite multi-million-dollar bounties from both Mexico and the United States, he evaded capture again and again. Reports placed him moving through the mountains of Jalisco, sometimes in armored vehicles, sometimes on horseback, protected by small, highly trained groups known as Los Deltas. Intelligence suggested that he relied on a network of rural communities that provided safe passage in exchange for money and protection, much like guerrilla warfare tactics from decades past. Meanwhile, CJMG's expansion continued. They established presence in at least 28 of Mexico's 32 states and extended their reach internationally. To the U.S., Europe, and even Asia, DEA operations traced meth and fentanyl shipments linked to the cartel as far as Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. The U.S. government designated CJNG as one of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations, comparing its reach to Hezbollah or ISIS in operational structure and secrecy. Yet through it all, El Mencho remained unseen. There were no verified photos of him after 2012, no confirmed sightings, no videos or calls intercepted. He had become the ghost of the narco world, everywhere and nowhere. In 2018, the U.S. unsealed indictments against him, charging him with drug trafficking and organized crime. The bounty on his head rose to $10 million, making him one of the most wanted men in the world. That same year, his wife Rosalinda was arrested in Zapopan, accused of money laundering for the cartel. Authorities hoped to use her as leverage, but she was released shortly after, sparking allegations of corruption and political interference. The message was clear: the state could touch his family, but not him. CJNG's rise coincided with Mexico's deepening political instability. Each administration promised justice, each failed. Mencho's network infiltrated municipal governments, police forces, and local economies. In towns like Tepalcatepec and Aguililla, his forces clashed with rival groups and vigilante militias known as autodefenses. Civilians were trapped in the crossfire as convoys of cartel gunmen rolled through mountain roads, carrying .50 caliber rifles and homemade tanks. Yet, for many locals, CJNG's rule brought a kind of brutal order. No petty theft, no kidnappings without permission, and swift punishment for those who defied the chain of command. By 2019, reports surfaced of Mencho's declining health. Rumors suggested kidney disease, forcing him to seek refuge near medical facilities deep within rural Jalisco. Authorities intensified their manhunt, deploying drones, intelligence teams, and elite military units. Entire towns were raided, but each time, Mencho slipped away, warned in advance, protected by silence. His ability to vanish in a country crawling with soldiers and surveillance baffled both Mexican and U.S. intelligence. Theories grew. Some claimed he lived under a different identity. Others said he moved constantly, living in makeshift camps guarded by loyalists. His myth only grew with every failed operation. In the same period, CJNG's violence escalated. Police ambushes, mass graves, and brutal messages left along highways became part of daily headlines. One of the most shocking attacks came in 2020 when gunmen ambushed Mexico City's police chief, Omar Garcia Harfuch, in broad daylight. Over 400 bullets were fired, killing his bodyguards and injuring the chief himself. Authorities later linked the assault to CJNG, a demonstration that their power extended even into the capital's core. It was no longer just a cartel, it was an army, and El Mencho was its invisible general. By 2021, El Mencho's name had become legend. DEA reports suggested that his organization was producing vast amounts of fentanyl, fueling the overdose crisis in the United States. Billions of dollars flowed through networks of shell companies, front businesses, and corrupt officials. Despite global attention, his image remained almost mythic. No public appearances, no recordings, no mistakes. For law enforcement, he was a phantom, for his men, a living god. The DEA called him Mexico's ghost target, a man whose existence could only be traced by the destruction left in his wake. In rural Jalisco, people still whispered about him. How his convoy passed silently at night, how his men handed out food during storms, how his name commanded both fear and loyalty. Some said he was sick, others said he was dead, but his cartel kept moving, expanding, adapting. His son, El Menchito, imprisoned in the United States, was still referred to as heir apparent. Another figure, known as La Menchita, his daughter, handled parts of the financial network. Every family member seemed woven into the fabric of the operation, binding it tighter even as the state tried to unravel it. As the manhunt intensified, the United States expanded its pressure. In 2022, the Treasury Department sanctioned dozens of CJNG affiliates, freezing assets and cutting access to global finance systems. Mexican Marines launched raids across Jalisco and Colima, capturing lieutenants and financiers. Yet, time after time, Mencho remained a step ahead. He had built his empire not around trust, but isolation. Each cell knew little of the other, communication lines were restricted, and loyalty was bought with both money and fear. His survival was not luck, it was design. By the mid-2020s, El Mencho had become both a ghost and a symbol of Mexico's enduring struggle against organized crime. His story reflected the evolution of cartels from crude, trafficking networks into hybrid forces. Part military, part corporate, part political. No photos, no trails, no proof of life, only the consequences of his decisions visible across continents. The man who once worked in California's fields had outwitted 2 governments, dozens of task forces, and the passage of time itself. His myth lived on in silence, deep within the mountains where the law still did not reach. As 2025 progressed, the hunt for El Mencho intensified on multiple fronts. Intelligence gathered by both Mexican and U.S. agencies showed that the cartel's structure was under stress, not because its leader was captured, but because the pressure forced change. His older brother, known as Don Rodo, was recaptured by Mexican authorities in February of that year. His arrest marked a significant blow to the financial and property network that had sustained the operation for years. With one of the founding figures of the organization in custody, the sprawling web of land purchases, shell companies, and hidden bank transfers suffered a setback. Meanwhile, his son, Ruben Oseguera Gonza, Les, El Menchito, in the narco world, had already been sentenced to life plus 30 years in the United States for drug, trafficking, and weapons charges. His removal from the inner circle left a vacuum that the cartel scrambled to fill, yet it also reinforced the aura of invincibility around his father, the man who remained at large. The mapping of the cartel's money flows revealed more. In late 2024, El Mencho's son-in-law, El Gacho, pleaded guilty in the U.S. to money laundering charges. The web reached across borders, linking real estate transactions in the United States with covert transfers into and out of Mexico. The lesson was clear: while foot soldiers were being captured, the leader stayed invisible. At the same time, new revelations emerged of a training and recruitment compound operated by the cartel. In March of 2025, a group of citizen search collectives discovered what they described as a ranch in the state of Jalisco, known locally as Rancho Oseguera, which had been used by the cartel to recruit, train, and allegedly torture young men who responded to fake job offers. Dozens of pairs of shoes, charred clothing, and discarded personal items were found, raising alarm over forced disappearances and runaway recruits. The government later clarified the site was a training center, not a full-scale extermination camp. Yet the significance remained. The cartel had shifted from trafficking to full-blown paramilitary recruitment and conditioning. The operational reach of the cartel was on display. Across highways in Jalisco, Veracruz, Michoacán, and Guanajuato, dozens of bodies appeared, roadblocks, convoys of armed men, improvised tanks and drones now marked cartel territory. One incident stood out. Authorities uncovered a mass grave near Guadalajara, 48 bags of human remains, signaling what many described as a new norm of violence and disappearance. The local communities knew that the law had penetrated in name, but on the ground the cartel's network remained deeply embedded. In places like Tepalcatepec and Aguililla, the cartel acted as de facto authority. It collected payments, enforced its own rules, intimidated anyone who opposed them, and went largely unchecked. Governments responded. The U.S. Treasury Department in June of 2025 designated 5 high-ranking cartel figures, including El Mencho, under sanctions tied to violent crime and drug trafficking. The killing of a social media influencer in Zapopan during a live broadcast triggered a sanction specifically citing the cartel's role in gender-based violence. Mexican federal and state forces also launched operations. Elite Marine units raided safe houses, froze bank accounts, seized assets. Yet each raid that made the headlines seemed to produce arrests of lieutenants, not the leader himself. With each failed attempt to capture him, the myth of El Mencho grew larger. Inside the cartel, the internal logic changed. With so many associates arrested or cooperating, the circle closed tighter. Communication shifted to ultra-secure methods. Convoys were smaller. The leader split his time between the mountains of Jalisco and temporary hideouts in remote forested zones, sometimes traveling in civilian vehicles, sometimes on horseback in terrain soldiers found nearly impossible to track. His men referred to the new operating principle as invisibility. Instead of loud demonstrations of power, they stayed quiet, changed locations, kept minimal contact. Local communities were kept in line, not just by force, but by the expectation of protection. In places the state failed, the cartel claimed to fill the void. Locals reported that armed men offered food in heavy storms, cleaned up roads, and made visible gestures of authority. That dual role, violent enforcer and provider, was part of the strategy. The drug trafficking itself transformed. While cocaine from South America still flowed, the cartel layered in synthetic opioids, fentanyl in particular. Smuggling routes through Asia to the U.S. and Europe were expanded. The cartel's labs in remote mountain zones grew more sophisticated. Agents intercepted shipments in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York traced back to the network built under El Mencho's oversight. The profits soared. With money flowing in, property acquisitions multiplied. Luxury homes, ranches, commercial buildings in Guadalajara and abroad. Corruption at the municipal level, once opportunistic, became systemic. Mayors, municipal police chiefs, land registry officials were bribed or intimidated. In one case, the mayor of Tuchitlan was arrested on charges of organized crime and forced disappearance. He allegedly accepted monthly bribes and allowed municipal resources to facilitate the recruitment ranch. The Mexican government publicly promised to change new task forces, extraditions, joint U.S.-Mexico intelligence sharing. In August 2025, 26 high-ranking cartel figures were handed over to U.S. custody in a major cooperative move. Yet despite dozens of arrests, the central figure remained free. Analysts concluded that capturing El Mencho wouldn't mean the end of the cartel, but it would shake the foundations. He had become the symbol, the ghost target that kept everyone else in line. Meanwhile, the effect on the ground was devastating. Homicide rates in many regions hit record levels. Families disappeared, entire villages went silent. The society saw how cartel rule supplanted civic order. In Jalisco, local civil society groups staged vigils after the discovery of the recruitment ranch, laying out personal items, shoes, photographs of missing young men. The wounded trust in the state deepened. People ask, if the army can't find him, what can we expect? If corruption is so deep, can any town really push back? In response, the cartel's propaganda machine evolved. Social media videos emerged, mass leaflet drops, banners asserting control, flags claiming territory. But this time the noise was quieter, banners were fewer, messages discreet. The leadership wanted to avoid spotlight. The old pattern, announce, show power, seek attention, had given way to a lower profile approach. The leader himself rarely surfaced. When he did, it was via intermediaries, coded messages, artistic tribute songs that evoked his myth without showing his face. One corrido reached the top of global lyric charts dedicated to him. The authorities froze the band's accounts and revoked visas of the musicians involved. What this really meant is that El Mencho had adapted. He understood the limits of exposure. He knew that every public show of force invited retaliation. So he refined the strategy, maintain the violence, but restrain the spectacle. Make the community believe in the presence, not the image. Move money, traffic drugs, recruit silently. Use the mountains to hide, use remote safe zones to train, use social networks to communicate, but keep the man himself off camera. And yet the urgency of capturing him increased. U.S. intelligence placed the reward for information leading to his arrest at $15 million. Mexican forces intensified drone surveillance over Sierra de Jalisco, planted sensors along mountain roads, initiated joint operations across state borders. But each time they moved, he shifted. Each time they intercepted funds, another channel opened. Every time they raided a lab, several more were found elsewhere. The network was resilient. It had grown not just in scale, but in structure, multiple cells, compartmentalized units, each with its own local leader. That way, if one fell, the rest kept working. By late 2025, the state of play had shifted. The old cartel era, where a few big names ruled hundreds through mass displays, was replaced by a hybrid corporate, narco plus paramilitary plus geopolitical actor. The leadership of El Mencho fit that profile. He wasn't the flashy murderer, he was the strategist. He didn't need to be seen. He needed the system of fear and loyalty to function without him being visible. Communities in Jalisco and beyond experienced this shift in real time. In one rural municipality, residents reported that the local cartel cell printed ID cards, offered education scholarships, and made public works, repairing roads, restoring water systems. But in the same village, those who refused to cooperate vanished. One man submitted to the system, another disappeared, his belongings left behind. The logic of coercion and co-optation ran deep, and though the army of the Mexican state stood outside, the voices inside the communities were quieter, fearful, compliant, less likely to protest. In the corridors of power, the effect was visible. Politicians and business, people increasingly distrusted each other. Local officials were found to have ties to the cartel. Land deals were reversed, but other deals flourished. The cartel had infiltrated into local economies, avocado plantations, construction companies, fuel, theft operations, online recruitment. The U.S. pointed to the cartel's role in the fentanyl crisis, tying it to overdose deaths, and the label of terrorist organization surfaced in diplomatic statements. Capturing or neutralizing El Mencho would become not just Mexican business, but international strategic priority. Yet for all that, the man himself still operated. He slipped through mountainous terrain. He moved through forested zones with satellite phones off, vehicles low profile. His men kept him insulated. Intelligence reports suggested he had a rotating set of bodies around him, making tracking difficult. Some in the intelligence community believed he may now live under a false identity. Others speculated he split into multiple safe houses, teleconferencing, rather than meeting in person. Whatever the truth, the myth of the ghost target fit. In the narco world, myth is as powerful as muscle. And so the stage remained set: the law hunting, the hunted adapting. On one side, the forces of the state and international cooperation. On the other, a cartel whose leader had mastered invisibility and whose organization thrived on fear and profit. The man who once labored in California construction gangs now sat, according to analysts, at the head of a transnational empire, orchestrating shipments, coordinating violence, directing recruitment, managing finances, all while never being captured. History may regard him as one of the most elusive figures of the drug war. The legacy of his reign, however, is already being written in the missing persons, the skeletons uncovered, the fog of terror cast across towns and highways.